the first ever Victoria Crosses introduced at the end of the war. Meanwhile, the French and Ottomans successfully stormed the heights on their side of the Allied line. Russian morale breaks, and the Allies are victorious. But in just 3 hours, they lose about 3,600 men, and the Russians nearly 5,000. Both sides leave their wounded unattended, as a Russian orderly recalls.
Hundreds of wounded had been deserted by their regiments, and these, with heart-rending cries and moans and pleading gestures, begged to be lifted onto the carts and carriages. One man had his leg blown off and his jaw smashed with his tongue torn out.
The device.
Only the expression on his face beating for a mouthful.
Lightweight and filled with ground explosives.
After the Allied victory at the Alma, the way to Sevastopol lies open, but the victors don't know it. Following their success at the Alma, Raglan and Sétasno don't realize how weak the Russians are. So 2 days go by before they begin to march around Sevastopol to its supposedly weaker southern flank. The Allies also take Balaclava and make its harbor their primary supply base, while most Russian forces withdraw to the peninsula's interior. The Allies now lay siege to Sevastopol, set up camp, and dig entrenchments and redoubts to protect themselves from the Russian garrison. British Captain Radcliffe describes routine trench duty.
A few men were placed on the lookout, their heads a few inches above the wall, to give notice when the Russians fired, by watching the smoke from the guns by day and the flash by night, and calling out shots.
So tell me.
When all in the trenches lie down and get under cover of the breastwork until it's passed, and then resume their work.
The Russians now hatch a plan to sever the Allied supply route from Balaclava and destroy the harbor, which would force the Allies to leave Sevastopol.
What's the problem?
The Russians attack at daybreak on October 25th.
I'm sorry.
The 500 Ottoman troops defending the first redoubt offer strong resistance, but are eventually driven out.
Trust me.
This defeat breaks the morale of the other Allied defenders, and soon only the British 93rd Division stands between the Russians and the harbor.
Who's the target?
The British once again rely on the stopping power of their rifles and form a line. Reporter William Howard Russell is there.
Trying not to suck.
The Russians dash at the Highlanders. The ground flies beneath their horses' feet, gathering speed. At every stride, they dash on towards that thin red streak, topped with a line of steel.
Green and white logo.
These words are later and forever misquoted as a thin red line. Accurate British fire forces the Russians to abandon the attack. And with more Allied reinforcements on the way, the Russians withdraw from 2 of the redoubts and take the Allied cannons as booty. Lord Raglan's pride is so hurt that he orders his troops to recapture the guns. But the commanders on the ground don't understand which guns he means. In the confusion, the British Light Cavalry Brigade mistakenly charges straight into the Russians' main force. After reaching the Russian lines and taking heavy casualties, the brigade retreats, an infamous action that becomes a symbol of officer incompetence and inspires Lord Tennyson to write an immortal poem.
Add sparkle to any design. Glitter stickers by Sticker Book. Glitter stickers are a fun way to showcase your artwork, promote your brand, or dazzle the ordinary. Each sticker is printed in full color on a glitter-like material that will make your artwork truly shine. To get started, select the size and quantity, upload your artwork, and check out.
Then I want to see
Within
my
a few hours, we'll send you a video showing
Why don't you do your
glitter
job
stickers
and
will
pass
look.
on my
You can
request?
request
Want to see me do my job?
for free until you're happy. Easy ordering, fast turnaround, and free shipping. Sticker Mill is the interdisciplinary place to buy glitter stickers.
Look, you're right about Sarah. She doesn't like the country around, but she's genuine and a good listener.
So you think you know Wix? Do you really?
Whatever mission we have, it's
First up, we've got shape video masks. You can use different shapes to create completely different vibes and aesthetics. Or you can create your own graphic. I use the shape composition here. Just import any SVG file and set it as a shape mask.
I was sent out on
Nice.
I almost
Next
got
up,
killed,
we'll keep it
remember?
moving with the hoverbox.
No, it's not
You can
different
use it to
for any
animate
of
any
us.
element and create these really eye-catching interactions. And what I love is that the level of control you get here is
Doesn't matter if we
crazy
get killed because
precise.
we're already
You
dead.
can set your animation ease, scale size, and position to create this really dope effect. Third, we've got the Mega Menu. This not only lets you organize your site menu into different subcategories, but it also looks amazing when you add in different elements like text, buttons, images, pretty much anything you can think of. And last but not least, we've got My Designs. This feature lets you save any section or component that you've already created. And you can use it as a starting point on any other pages or sites you're working on. This one's personally saved me a ton of time. So you got all these features. Now see what you can do with them. Get on over to Wix and create something dope.
Okay, recruit. Review the steps.
Enter the lobby. Run. Let security chase me to the protesters.
I'll be monitoring you from here.
The Battle of Balaclava ends in a limited Russian
Are we up in
victory,
security
despite not quite reaching the harbor. The Tsar, though, is encouraged, so he orders more attacks against the British and French at Inkerman Ridge. If the Russians take Inkerman, they can fire their cannons into the rear of the Allied siege lines. They plan to attack the British sector of the line, which they consider weaker than the French. On November 5th, 50,000 Russians attack just 16,000 Allied troops, but the thick fog confuses Russian command and control. The battle develops into a series of chaotic small-scale actions, with the Russians taking redoubts before losing them to British counterattacks. Russian confusion prevents planned diversionary attacks against French positions. French troops now come to the aid of their hard-pressed British allies, leading to dramatic scenes in the memoirs of French soldier Louis Noir.
It's time to finish them, Zouave
She's
cried
not clear of the
impatiently.
lobby.
Suddenly, Bosky turned and drew his sword, placed himself at the head of the Zouaves, and pointing his sword towards the 20,000 Russian troops, shouted in a thunderous voice, En avant! À la bayonnette!
That's nice.
The French charge shakes the Russians whose officers can't even locate their own reserves. The Zouaves pour fire into the wavering Russian ranks, which soon forces the Russians to pull back. The Battle of Inkerman is clearly an Allied victory. They protect their lines of communication and inflict 12,000 casualties on the Russians while taking just 4,300 of their own. The British could little afford the losses they'd suffered, but Russian hopes to relieve Sevastopol in 1854 are crashed. After the Allied victory at Inkerman, the fighting in Crimea settles in for the winter, with the Allies holding a small bridgehead in the southwest. Meanwhile, the war has a major impact elsewhere. European media might focus on Crimea, but there's also fighting on big fronts. The powerful Royal Navy leads Allied efforts in the Baltic Sea, where it hopes to attack the Russian ships at Reval. The Russian fleet withdraws, and the British vessels bombard several Russian coastal outposts with little result. On August 8, 1854, French troops land on the Russian-controlled Baltic Åland Islands and besiege the fortress of Bomarsund, forcing the garrison's surrender. The Allies offer the islands to Sweden if it will join the war, but the Swedes refuse, so the Allies leave and the Russians return. Allied ships also sail much farther afield, launching several attacks in the Arctic White Sea, and in the Pacific, they attempt an aborted landing on the coast of Kamchatka. On the diplomatic front, the Kingdom of Sardinia joins the Allies in January 1855 and sends 15,000 troops to Crimea. King Victor Emmanuel and the Count of Cavour hope that by joining France, they can gain Napoleon III's support for Italian unification under the House of Savoy. The winter of 1854-55 is a long one for Russian soldiers and civilians trapped in Sevastopol and for the blockading Allied troops. Disease has been running rampant since the start of the war, and both Raglan and Saint-Arnaud die from dysentery or cholera. The Allies also suffer from extreme logistical problems. Ottoman commanders rely on the Allies for resupply, and their troops are short of food. British Admiral Adolphus Slade, serving with the Ottomans as Mujaver Pasha, criticizes Ottoman officers' unwillingness to complain on their own troops' behalf.
All right, give me directions.
For the Pashas serving the Allies, the loss of 1,000 men was not to be named in the same breath with the loss of the English general's smile.
Big move since I left.
I don't believe you. Drive
The
faster.
British are
So we can get
totally
stopped by the
unprepared for the
cops?
I
cold
said
weather.
speed up.
The French are much better equipped. Suffering British troops write letters home complaining about the army's inability to care for them. In fact, during the Crimean War, the public is flooded with news like never before. Thanks to new technology like the telegraph, French, British, and Russian readers can follow and react to events on the battlefield thousands of kilometers away within just a day or two.
Amanda told you were
Journalists like William Howard Russell become famous for their war reporting, and their articles are
They used
often
you to frame
accompanied
innocent
by
people,
another
Sarah.
innovation: photographs.
I don't...
These are mostly posed shots of officers and
Going
serve
into
up a sanitized version of the war for propaganda, but the
No.
overall media effect
No, I
is
have to go
palpable.
back.
British poet Edward Goss is one of those connected to the war
to division.
through media.
I won't tell them anything.
The declaration
about
of war
you,
with Russia
about
brought the
this
first
place, I
breath of
swear.
outside life into our Calvary's cloister. My parents took in a daily newspaper, which they had never done before, and events, picturesque places, which my father and I looked at on the map, were eagerly discussed.
The media frenzy and the speed of news from the front also means that the public can react to events and pressure governments like never before. One name in the news is British nurse Florence Nightingale, who rises to fame for her work as an administrator at a British hospital near Constantinople. Despite her important impact in professionalizing nursing, there's still a heated debate today about whether she actually reduces the death rate of her hospital's patients. The terrible conditions in Crimea and the disaster of the Light Brigade at Balaclava become major scandals and even helped force Prime Minister Lord Aberdeen to resign in January 1855. He is replaced by the more aggressive Palmerston. The Russians also have problems with supply and medical care, but there's at least one positive. Surgeon Nikolai Pirogov engineers the system of medical triage to treat life-threatening cases more efficiently, a system that other armies only adopted in the First World War. Thanks to his work, wounded Russian soldiers have higher survival rates than their Allied counterparts, especially after amputations. Conditions in Sevastopol, though, are still miserable, as artillery officer Leo Tolstoy observed.
I've been a recruit longer than you have.
We have a horde of slaves cowed by discipline, ordered about by thieves and slave traders.
Get out.
This horde is not an army because it possesses neither any real loyalty to faith, Tsar and fatherland, words that are not misused, nor valor, nor military dignity. All it possesses are on the one hand passive patience and repressed discontent, and on the other, cruelty, servitude, and corruption.
You mean they need us to kill for them?
Business has been going great. We've grown so much, so fast.
I'm guessing
Honestly,
you
I
are
don't know how we could have done it without
Right.
Monday.com. Being successful means having to manage twice the clients, twice the projects, twice the work. Several people recommended
Division, I
Monday.com.
had no future.
And at first, I have
languages,
to admit,
trade.
I wasn't sure what it could do for
When I
a
make field
company.
agent,
But
I'm gonna get
fast
to
forward a few months later, and now we manage
fast cars,
everything.
fancy hotels, Europe, Japan.
We've never moved this fast.
Whatever.
We have a vision.
It's all stuff that
we
I never
execute
could.
it. It's that streamlined. We're generating a lot of new business. Look, it's more than just a better way to work.
so bad
It gives us the power to become the company we want to be. I love it.
What
The
are you
soldiers are suffering, but so are the civilians.
Video.
Most of the population are Crimean Tatars, Muslim people who speak a Turkic language. The Tsarist government suspects them of Ottoman sympathies and adopts repressive policies, including frequent individual deportations to Central Asia. During the war, some Tatars escape and resettle in the Ottoman Balkans, and the Russians replace them with Christians fleeing the Balkans and Slavs from other parts of the empire. After the war, the Crimean Tatars become a minority in their own homeland for good. The war is being felt in Crimea and across Europe, even as prime ministers and monarchs come
When
and
I
go.
was 16,
Tsar
I
Nicholas
had a baby.
dies in March 1855 and is succeeded
My
by his son
parents said I was
Alexander,
too young.
just in time
I just
for a
didn't
major
care.
defeat. In spring
Instead,
1855,
they
the Allies are
took me to
determined
this
to take
shady
Sevastopol
lawyer.
to the point of neglecting their efforts in the
They said
Baltic
that
and in the
adoption
Caucasus.
was the best
Royal
answer.
Navy ships block Russian supply routes through the Sea of Azov, and British and French
cash we got
industrial
kept my
might
parents
makes
happy.
itself felt. A new railway line allows them to
I thought
fire
that
more
if
than
I
160,000 shells into Sevastopol
find my
in
son.
April alone. This marks the first time that railroad technology is
When I
used
said
this
I
way
made a
in
promise,
war.
it wasn't division.
Allied ground forces capture the city's outer defenses on June 6th and attack the Malakoff and Great Redan redoubts on June
tell anyone in
18th
division.
at French request on the anniversary of the Battle of Waterloo.
Why?
The plan is for the French to attack the Malakoff first, followed by a British attack on the Redan. Militarily unnecessary if the French succeed, but Raglan wants to preserve British honor. French soldier Herbe is shocked when Russian officers cross no man's land the night before the assault.
Look, Sarah,
The
I know
Russians
it's
said to
painful.
us, Allons, messieurs les
But you have to leave your
Français.
past where it
When you
is.
are ready, we shall be
You're
waiting.
young enough to start a
It
new
was
life.
obvious that the enemy knew all our plans,
That's the same
and that we
with
would find a well-prepared defense.
The difference is I'm trying to help you.
The first French and British attacks failed completely. The first Russian volley takes out a third of the British attackers, and the rest flee despite their officers threatening to shoot them. Russian Empire soldier Prokofy Podpalov remembers the slaughter.
Suddenly, the enemy came towards us in a huge wave. Our bugle sounded, followed by the booming of our cannon and the firing of our guns. It was so dark when the gun smoke could be seen. When it cleared, we could see that the ground in front of us was covered with the bodies of the British forces.
The Allies lose 7,500 men for nothing. This stalemate continues into its 10th month. There are more and more cases of trench fatigue, and Louis Noir even sees battle-hardened Zouaves wake up from nightmares screaming for help against imaginary enemies. The Russians are losing 250 men a day whom they cannot replace, and in July, Allied shelling kills Sevastopol commander Admiral Pavel Nakhimov. Tsar knows his army is running out of time with the Sea of Azov supplies cut off, so in August, the Russians launch an attack on the Allied watering places on the Chernaya River. 30,000 Russian infantry outnumber the 9,000 Sardinians and 18,000 French defenders, but the Russians lack cavalry or artillery, and the Allies have the high ground. Russian troops launch a frontal assault with unclear orders, which goes nowhere. They lose 8,000 dead and wounded for nothing. The Allies try again in September. They extend their trenches to within just 50 meters of the Russian positions, but lose 200 men daily to Russian sharpshooters. The plan is again for the French to attack Malakoff first, followed by the British at Verdun. When the French attack on September 8th, they catch the Russians by surprise. Prokofy Podpalov remembers.
The French are in the Malakoff before our boys had a chance to grab their guns. In a few seconds, they'd filled the fort with hundreds of their men, and hardly a shot was fired from our side.
At Verdun, the British try and fail 3 times. A bitter memory for Lieutenant Griffith.
We rushed madly along the trenches, grape shots flying about our ears, and men coming down on all sides. When I got to the edge of the ditch of the Verdun, Radcliffe and I were holding the ladder, went up against the top of the parapet while we were stopped by the press. Wounded and dead men kept tumbling down on us.
Panicked British infantrymen again retreat to their lines, this time after 2,600 casualties. Their officers order another attack, but there's no need. Since the French have taken Malakoff, Verdun cannot be held and the Russians withdraw. Russian command now sees the writing on the wall and orders an evacuation of Sevastopol. Nurse Alexandra Stakhova is in the midst of the disaster.
Now recruit.
Now recruit for long.
From everywhere the sounds of explosions. It was a scene of terror and chaos. Sevastopol was covered in black smoke. Our own troops were setting fire to the town.
The siege of Sevastopol is over. The cost of 102,000 Russian and 71,000 Allied lives. Back in St. Petersburg, Tsar Alexander is defiant.
Sevastopol is not Moscow. The Crimea is not Russia. 2 years after the burning of Moscow in 1812, our victorious troops were in Paris. We are still the same Russians, and God is with us.
Congratulations.
By late 1855, Allies and the Russians are exhausted, and winter is coming. On the Caucasus front, Russians capture the besieged city of Kars on November 26th, despite the efforts of the Anglo-Ottoman garrison. This leaves Russia in control of more enemy territory than the Allies, for peace talks.
Really excited.
Simultaneously, the British assemble a powerful Baltic fleet called the Grand Armament of 1856 to finish the war the next year. Some historians suggest that the threat of this fleet helps end the war, even though it never sees action. That's because Napoleon III is satisfied with French victories and wants peace. In January 1856, the French reject British proposals to open new fronts, and the two nations decide to end the Crimea campaign. The French now approach the neutral Austrians, and the two powers present Russia with an ultimatum. Tsar cannot risk Austrian intervention, so negotiations begin in Paris. First, the French and British argue, since the British insist on harder terms, but in the end the French prevail and the Treaty of Paris is signed on March 30th, 1856. Russia agrees to give parts of Bessarabia back to Moldavia, renounce influence over the Danubian principalities, accept demilitarization of the Black Sea, and abandon its claim to represent Ottoman Christians. The Ottoman Empire's pre-war boundaries are preserved, plus some small gains in Bessarabia. A major victory for Constantinople. The Treaty of Paris, though, is not a long-term answer to the Eastern question. The concert of Europe is restless. Russia still wants to expand south as soon as it can regain its strength. The Ottomans are more integrated into European affairs, but they're still weak, and outside interference in Ottoman affairs continues. Austria is isolated and will find itself without allies
They told me that I was graduate.
with France, Sardinia, and
then they
Prussia.
gave me that.
Britain remains the main global power,
said that I was
but there's
structured.
public disappointment
I followed
and
orders.
scandals
You got the
and heavy
recruits.
losses
Look up.
for the sake of preserving the Ottomans. France, on the other hand, gains international prestige, ends the war on its terms,
Alex,
and
they made me.
solidifies the
Guard.
new emperor's authority. As for the Sardinians, the kingdom improves its relations with France, which will bear fruit in future wars for Italian unification. For regular soldiers, nurses, and civilians, though, geopolitics are a distant reality from
What am I
the
supposed to
pain
do now?
and the loss of war. Russia loses about 450,000 dead, the French around 100,000, the Ottomans some 45,000, the British 22,000, and the Sardinians 2,300. Most of the men die of disease, not from combat. Aside from being deadly, the Crimean War is also a transitional conflict. It's partly a traditional cabinet war, and it's the last European war where religion is used as a primary justification. But it's also modern in terms of technology, science, media, and cultural aspects. The first industrial war. Some even consider it the first modern war, though that debate still rages on today when another modern war has come to Crimea.
There is no future.
Of course, any technological advance comes with new challenges for simple humans like us who need to use these new gadgets. In 1853, that cutting-edge telegraph connection brought with it its own set of problems like messages being intercepted. And 170 years later, the issue is not so different if you look at browsing the internet and trying to use secure passwords so you can safely do your online shopping or watch the latest real-time history videos on YouTube. That's why password managers like NordPass are so important and useful. With NordPass, you can generate unique and secure passwords for every account, store them in your own vault without the need to memorize each password, and with the autofill feature, you don't need to type in each password either, which makes all your online activities faster and more convenient. And the best thing, when you're regularly traveling like me, and want to maintain that level of security and convenience, you can take NordPass with you and use it on multiple devices. This is not just super helpful for the passwords you read on the go, but you can also safely store other data in NordPass. As sponsor of this video, NordPass has a special deal for you at nordpass.com/realtimehistorypass. Save 36% on a 2-year plan at NordPass and get an entire month for free. You can try NordPass for 30 days, and if you're not satisfied, get your money back. That's nordpass.com/realtimehistorypass for a special offer that also supports our channel. We'd like to thank Travis Nyland and Mark Newton for their help with this episode. And as usual, you can find all our sources in the video description below. If you're watching this on Patreon or Nebula, thank you so much for your support. We couldn't do it without you. I'm Jesse Alexander, and this is a production of Real Time History, the only YouTube history channel that wants to remind you that the Tsar himself said Crimea is not Russia.
Get up.
How did they do that?
They hacked the Bluetooth. Stay low, did I say?
Stehen bereit. Feuerüberlegenheit. Ich will Feuerüberlegenheit. Überprüft Waffen und Munition. Deckung. Aufgerödelt und bereit zum Einsatz. Haha, das hat gesetzt. Wie lauten Ihre Befehle?
I want to take you both in alive.
It's too late. Sarah's dead. One of your men just killed her. It's just you and me now.
This is Michael. Requesting satellite image.
on my location. Special units down here ASAP.
The treaty did not force the Tsar to give up any territory, but it did compel Russia to join the continental system, ally with France, and declare war on the United Kingdom. The Tsar also agreed to recognize French satellite states and renounce Russian interests in the Balkans. In the years after Tilsit, the blockade of Great Britain reduced trade in Russia's Baltic ports by a third. The ruble lost 50% of its value, and annual deficits soared. Political interests also drove France and Russia further apart before 1812. The most explosive problem was the status of a Polish state. In 1807, Napoleon created the Grand Duchy of Warsaw, a client state that greatly worried Russian ruling circles. Russia had gained much of its western territory in the 18th century partitions of Poland, and its leaders feared that the Grand Duchy was a step towards recreating a full Polish kingdom that would want those lands back. The Polish question was politically useful for Napoleon as well. He referred to the 1805-1807 war as the First Polish War, and in his proclamation to the Grande Armée in 1812, he announced the invasion of Russia as the Second Polish War, but he never promised a Polish kingdom. The Tsar hoped that he could win over the Poles by offering them a kingdom, but insisted that he be crowned king. So in 1812, the Polish question was still open. Russian and French interests also clashed in the Baltic and in the Balkans. In 1808-09, Russia defeated Sweden and took control of Finland, which became a Russian satellite. In 1810, Sweden elected French Marshal Jean Bernadotte as regent, so Russia now worried about French influence on its northern border. To the south, Russia and the Ottoman Empire also fought a war from 1806 to 1812 over influence in the Balkans and control of the Dardanelles. One of the political flashpoints was a personal one for the Tsar. When Napoleon redrew the borders of the German lands by creating the Confederation of Rhine and expanding the French Empire, he dispossessed the Duke of the tiny Duchy of Olm. Duke George, however, happened to be married to the Tsar's sister, Catherine, and the couple exiled themselves to Russia. The Tsar took this as a grave insult to his honor and viewed it as a severe breach of the aristocratic code. Napoleon may have been emperor of the French and king of Italy, but he had little respect for the old order and Christian religion that Alexander held so dear. His ideological and personal differences also contributed to the reason the Grande Armée crossed the Dnieper. Napoleon saw himself as a man destined for European imperial hegemony. He felt that his mission was to spread a rational, French Revolution-inspired system all across Europe, with one currency, one system of weights and measures, and one rational philosophy of administration.
Just me.
As he put it, he wanted to make Paris the capital of the world. For good measure, the French emperor also spoke of freeing the Polish nation. Tsar Alexander saw himself as protector of the traditional, divinely ordained order, with a mission from God to resist Napoleon that he admired and feared, but also viewed as bent on conquest. The two men held talks together at Tilsit in 1807 and again at Erfurt in 1808, but came no closer to understanding each other or resolving their differences in power politics, although they did praise each other in official communication. The peace brought by the Treaty of Tilsit in 1807 was strained economic, geopolitical, and ideological tensions between France and Russia. Napoleon wanted to somehow keep Russia as an ally in the main struggle against Britain, but the Tsar had other plans.
Are you sorry for what?
This.
On New Year's Eve 1810, the Tsar declared that Russia was leaving the continental system in violation of the Tilsit Treaty. By 1811, at the latest, both sides viewed a coming war as inevitable. The Tsar was determined not to be the aggressor, but Napoleon had no such hesitations. In early 1812, diplomatic preparations reached a fever pitch. France signed agreements with former enemies Prussia and Austria, which forced their reluctant monarchs to provide a total of some 70,000 troops to support the Grande Armée. The Russians ended their war with the Ottomans and signed an agreement with Sweden. After unsuccessful diplomatic advances, the French went so far as to occupy Swedish Pomerania in January 1812 to enforce the blockade. Russia even made a secret agreement with Count Metternich that Austrian troops would not be used aggressively, even if the French forced them to invade. The espionage war intensified, with the French uncovering a Russian spy ring in Paris and sending their own agent to the Grand Duchy of Warsaw to gather intelligence. French presses even printed fake Russian rubles for the army to buy local supplies. While in Russia, the Tsar's authorities cracked down on prominent Francophiles, spread anti-French propaganda, and censored the Pope. The nobility began to worry that if the French did come, they might liberate the serfs or inspire them to rise up against their masters. Russian officer P.A. Davidov decided to re-enlist in the army and wrote of the growing tension to a friend.
Daniel.
According to what is being said and what is being prepared, war with the French is imminent. As for who will command the army, we know nothing. They only say that Tsar himself will soon inspect. There's no other news. The war is on everyone's mind. Both sides also began full-scale military preparations from 1811. They conscripted significantly more men to fill out the ranks and made logistical arrangements to supply the growing armies. French authorities began to fill their supply depots, and in early 1812, units began the long, cold march from their barracks in France, Spain, Italian Peninsula, or the German lands to East Prussia and the Grand Duchy of Warsaw. First, no one knew exactly where or whom they would fight. Rumors hinted that they might march against Prussia, Sweden, Russia, the Ottomans, or even British India. Even as the armies confidently marched east, some Frenchmen feared that their emperor was making a mistake. Some regions of the country were experiencing a wheat shortage and had little stomach for another war after decades of fighting. Even some of Napoleon's advisors tried to warn him, like former Minister of Police Joseph Fouché. No matter what success you achieve, the Russians will fight for every foot of those difficult lands where you will find nothing to feed the war. Half of your army will be employed in covering weak lines of communication, interrupted, threatened, or cut by swarms of Cossacks. Sire, I implore you in the name of France, in the name of glory, in the name of your security and ours, sheathe your sword. Sire, je vous conjure, au nom de la France, au nom de la gloire, au nom de votre sûreté et de la nôtre, remettez votre épée dans le fourreau. In Russia, army engineers fast-tracked the fort-building program to shore up defenses. Forts in Kiev, Riga, Babruisk, Dunaburg, and a fortified camp at Drissa were either renovated or built from scratch. 50,000 extra muskets were bought from Britain, and 100,000 men began to move from Finland and Bessarabia towards the western border. Last-minute diplomacy is little more than a charade. Tsar sent word to Napoleon that peace can be maintained if French-led troops withdrew beyond the Rhine, but there's little chance of that, and Napoleon does not answer. He eventually does send a reply, but he is committed to war, and the messenger is sent mostly to gather intelligence. After months of preparation and build-up, the war begins with the crossing of the Dnieper. Both the French and Russian high commands can now put their war plans into action, and these are as different as could be.
Hey, Yoshi.
The 650,000 men, 150,000 horses, and 1,393 cannon of the Grande Armée are divided into 5 units. The northern wing under Marshal MacDonald, the main force under Napoleon himself, and 2 others under Napoleon's stepson Eugène de Beauharnais and Napoleon's brother Jérôme, the King of Westphalia. Austrian forces under Prince Schwarzenberg are on the southern flank, and 2 corps stay in Prussia as reserve. The 200,000 men and 1,100 to 1,600 cannon of the Russian army are divided in 3. The 1st Western Army under Mikhail Barclay de Tolly, the 2nd Western Army under Prince Pyotr Bagration, and General Alexander Tarmasov's 3rd Observation Army troops protecting Ukraine. There are more Russian troops in other parts of the empire, but they're needed to guard its vast borders. Napoleon said he never wanted a war with Russia and is only invading to force them back into an alliance against Great Britain. And his military plans are ambivalent. He talks of marching on Moscow or St. Petersburg, of beating the Russians quickly in a decisive battle, or of campaigning into 1814. In any case, he promises to make war in a way never seen before. The Russian High Command also went back and forth on whether to adopt an offensive or defensive strategy. Ultimately, they choose a risky strategic retreat to draw the Grande Armée away from its bases before making a stand. Most of the men, however, like Lieutenant Ladozhitsky, have no inkling of this plan. We thought that we would immediately go out to meet the French, fight them on the border, and chase them back. As Napoleon's army of 20 nations streams across the Niemen in June 1812, the Tsar gathers with his commanders at his headquarters in Vilna. Discussions are tense, and there's confusion as to what exactly should be done and when, with the most powerful army in the world just a few days' march away. On June 25th, the Russian army receives its orders: retreat to the east. Meanwhile, French Captain Fontaine des Loire has just crossed the river and makes an entry in his diary. Vive l'Empereur! The Rubicon has been crossed. The shining sword, which has been drawn from its scabbard, will not be put away in it before some fine pages are added to the glorious annals of the great nation. The next day, des Loire and his French, German, Polish, and Italian comrades can see smoke rising from Vilna, but still no enemy in sight.
When you know the right steps, with Asana, you can coordinate tasks across teams and stay on track. So your team can spend more time celebrating wins. Try it for free at asana.com.
I just want to say goodbye.
Napoleon's Grande Armée crosses the Niemen River in June 1812, but in the following days, it does not find its Russian enemies. On June 28th, French-led troops enter the regional capital of Vilna after a brief cavalry skirmish on the outskirts. French officers, like General Banthézen, are surprised. In all directions, we found the Russian army in full retreat.
What do you want
We advanced without any
congratulations.
obstacle to our great
Congratulations.
surprise, since we couldn't imagine that the Russians would abandon the capital of Lithuania without firing a shot. But the Tsar, the Russian High Command, and the troops were gone. Before they left, the Russians destroyed the flour mills, warehouses, supplies, and the town bridge. Many pro-Russian residents also fled, but many Polish and Lithuanian notables hoped that Napoleon would grant them an independent state. The Countess of Tiesenhaus was moved. Prince Radzivill's regiment passed in our street, Polish Uhlans with a charming uniform and banners in the Polish colors. I was on the hotel balcony, and they saluted me and laughed. It was the first time in my life I saw Polish troops. I shed tears of joy and enthusiasm. I felt Polish. It was a moment to savor. Napoleon does set up a local administration on July 3rd and recruits up to 40,000 local troops, but he doesn't want to create a full Polish kingdom for fear that it will claim lands that his ally Austria took in the 18th century partitions of Poland. On June 30th, an envoy from the Tsar arrives and tells the French Emperor that Alexander will talk peace if the Grande Armée leaves Russia. Napoleon refuses the offer and decides to stay in Vilna while his army pursues the Russians. Meanwhile, Russian General Barclay de Tolly's First Western Army of 136,000 men is marching hard towards the fortified camp at Drissa. The goal is to meet up with Prince Bagration's Second Western Army and its 60,000 troops to make a stand along the renowned river. Barclay's retreat is going relatively well. Despite the strain on morale and discipline, only about 10,000 Russians desert, and the cavalry is mostly simply able to provide an effective rear guard. The main difficulty is the chain of command and the lack of operational plans for the strategic withdrawal. The Tsar told Barclay that the general was in overall command, but Alexander keeps interfering with orders of his own, and Bagration resists accepting Barclay's authority. Prince Bagration considers the retreat dishonorable.
Last time I saw her was about a week ago.
We were brought to the frontier, scattered along the ponds. Then, after they'd all sat there, mouths wide open,
you've had something you
shitting
needed to
along
tell
the
me
whole
since we
length
met.
of the border,
Just say it
off
all.
they fled. It all disgusts me so much that it's driving me crazy.
And then I said,
The prince wants to strike north into the flank of Napoleon's army group or west towards Warsaw. But either of these options would be far too risky given the superiority of the enemy. So after a few days' delay, Bagration also begins moving east to join up with Barclay. Napoleon wants to prevent the two Russian armies from joining up, so he hatches a plan. Marshal Davout turns towards Minsk to get between the two Russian armies.
Someone else.
If Davout can cut off Bagration's Jules Camisard, Géron's army can then smash the trapped Russian army to pieces. Things start well when Davout's maneuver cuts off General Platov's Cossack Corps from Barclay's army and forces them to join up with Bagration. But Géron's corps are having trouble. His army group leaves Grodno on the 30th and is immediately hampered by lack of food, poor roads, and alternating extremes of cold and hot weather. He also hesitated to attack Bagration since he had no intelligence about enemy forces. Napoleon is livid and orders Géron to pick up the pace and send his cavalry ahead. On July 4th, Bagration realizes that Davout is cutting off his path to Barclay, so the Georgian prince disobeys his order and changes direction to the southeast to avoid encirclement. Bagration has escaped the French trap for now, but the superior French-led forces are still hot on his heels. Is anyone here? But just who was marching in the so-called Army of 20 Nations?
Relax, Jack. Regal House is as private as it gets. You should know that better than anyone.
The Grande Armée of 1812 was massive. Over 650,000 men, about 150,000 horses, and 1,393 guns. 355,000 came from the French Empire, which included parts of the Italian peninsula, parts of the Rhineland, and the Low Countries. 80,000 are from the Grand Duchy of Warsaw, 36,000 from Prussia, 30,000 from Austria, 29,000 from the Kingdom of Westphalia, 27,000 from Saxony, 20,000 from the Kingdom of Italy, 16,500 from Württemberg, 15,000 from Bavaria, Denmark provides 9,800, the Kingdom of Naples 8,000, 6,800 from Hessen, 6,600 from Switzerland, 3,700 from Spain, 2,900 from the Illyrian provinces, 2,800 from Croatia and Dalmatia, 2,200 from Portugal, and 15,000 from smaller German duchies and principalities. Note that these are the paper strengths and actual boots on the ground are fewer. For the Russian campaign, Napoleon divides his forces into three main army groups called Grand Masse. One under Napoleon himself, including the Guard and the corps of Marshals Davout, Oudinot, and Ney, plus a massed cavalry force under Marshal Murat, who was also the King of Naples. Another group under his stepson, Eugène de Beauharnais, including Marshal Saint-Cyr's and Grouchy's corps, and the third group under his brother Géron, the King of Westphalia, which included Marshal Régnier's corps and the Polish Prince Poniatowski's corps. Marshal Macdonald commands the northern flanking corps, while Austrian forces under Prince von Schwarzenberg cover the south. In all, there are 11 army corps and 6 corps of cavalry. Of this total force, about 330,000 infantry, 70,000 cavalry, and 30,000 artillerymen actually cross into Russia in June 1812. Some of the men in the Grande Armée volunteer, but the majority are conscripts from the popular classes who can't pay for replacement. Many are experienced veterans, while others are among the 160,000 new recruits from the expanded French Empire. French infantry includes the Régiment de Ligne, light infantry like the Voltigeurs and the Chasseurs à Pied, and the elite 50,000 strong Imperial Guard. The artillery consists of foot and horse batteries, plus bridge layers, wagoners, and armament. The horses and drivers of the artillery trains are specialized in moving the guns and ammunition when not in combat, while the gunners handle the 6, 8, and 12-pound guns in battle. The cavalry is considered the best in the world, and it includes heavy cuirassiers, dragoons, hussars, lanciers, carabiniers, and chasseurs à cheval. It is still the most prestigious branch, but according to General Paul Thibault, cavalry wouldn't play a main role in a pitched battle. With few exceptions, the cavalry serves to complete or decide victory, but not to obtain it. The artillery must weaken enemy formations, the infantry must overrun them and break through, the cavalry must disperse them and take prisoners. Cavalry charges must be infrequent, but when they happen, must be all out. Since it can only fight in close quarters, cavalry must appear only when it will strike. Et comme elle ne peut combattre que corps à corps, elle ne doit paraître que pour frapper.
Do more with Viator.
Nearly half the Grande Armée is from outside the French Empire, from hesitant allies Prussia and Austria, or satellite states like the Grand Duchy of Normandy, the Confederation of the Rhine, or the Italian.
She just clocked into work.
Units from different states were often placed in the same larger formations. Notably, 3 Polish regiments were attached to the Young Guard. Some historians argue that non-French units were less motivated to fight, while others point to widespread respect, admiration, and even adulation towards Napoleon as a motivating factor for non-Frenchmen. There were certainly challenges with communication, given the number of languages spoken in the army and occasional French arrogance. Eugène, himself the viceroy of Italy, responded this way when General Pino complained about the lack of food. Gentlemen, what you ask for is not possible. If you are not happy, go back to Italy. I have nothing to do with you or the others. Know that I fear neither your sabers nor your daggers. The quality of the troops also varies, including those of the army of the Grand Duchy of Warsaw. The Polish cavalry was capable, but many of the Polish troops are in a poor state when campaigning. They spent much of the previous 2 years building fortresses in Bohemia, Prussia, and in the duchy itself. They've been poorly fed, many are suffering from scurvy and dysentery, and they often aren't paid by the cash-strapped duchy. 8 out of 10 men have never seen combat. There's also an issue with leadership, as Prince Poniatowski is unfamiliar with modern logistics, movement, and camp practices. For all their differences, though, Napoleon's troops did have some things in common, according to French officer Elzéar Lastre.
Strike team ETA 2 minutes.
The Grande Armée fought hard, seldom cheered, and always bitched.
Whoa.
In late June 1812, the Grande Armée is the most powerful army in Europe, but it's already getting weaker by the day. French logistics and supply plans are failing, and on the 30th, a snap cold rainstorm kills tens of thousands of draft and cavalry horses. Forcing a decisive battle before sickness and hunger take too much of a toll is becoming more and more urgent. The Russians have escaped for now, but Marshal Davout writes to his wife that the Emperor's genius will soon triumph.
Oh, well, the results of the paternity test aren't...
The Emperor's maneuvers will prevent this from being a particularly bloody campaign. We've taken Vilna without battle and forced the Russians to evacuate the whole of Poland. Such a beginning to the campaign is equivalent to a great victory. But not every victory will be without battle. Next week brings a baptism of fire.
Location.
No matter what I'm doing,
6th floor.
sweat, replenish, and do it again. Instant hydration.
By July 9, 1812, Prince Bagration's Second Western Army had retreated 250 kilometers in 10 days without a rest. He orders a stop at Liège and sends General Flatov's cavalry to hold up the advancing French-led army of King Jérôme. Jerome's vanguard of Polish Ulan cavalry clashed with the Cossacks at Mir in the first battle of the Russian campaign. Around 1,300 Poles attacked the village, and the Russian horsemen retreated. Some of the Poles gallop after them, but they run straight into an ambush. It's the Cossacks' Vientos who have 3,000 Russian horsemen are waiting for them and force the Poles back across the stream. When Polish reinforcements arrive that evening, the Russians pull back to the village of Simakova. On the 10th, Platov also gets more reinforcements and now outnumbers the Poles 6,000 to 3,000. The Poles don't know this, so they advance. Platov attacks the Ulans with everything he's got, including artillery and some regular troops.
First floor.
After 6 hours of desperate fighting, more Russian units arrive and the Poles withdraw. The 2-day skirmish cost the Russians 175 killed and wounded, while the Poles suffer 400 killed and wounded and 500 prisoners. It's a small Russian victory, but an important one for General Ivan Paskevich. This action had great consequences for morale. In the cavalry, you either beat the enemy or you're beaten. Всё зависит от первого успеха. Everything depends on the first success. Platov had to defeat the enemy at Mir to stop the boasting and arrogance of the Poles. The Russians win a tactical victory at Mir, which buys a little time for Bagration's tired foot soldiers on their strategic retreat. But the French are still breathing down their necks.
I got nothing back here.
Napoleon is trying to isolate and destroy Prince Bagration's second Western army before it can join up with the larger first Western army. Bagration, however, has changed course to avoid being trapped between Marshal Davout and King Jerome. After a brief rest helped by the Cossack defense of Mir, Bagration's troops resume their march toward Magyov. Davout's corps reaches Minsk on July 8th, only to learn that Bagration has escaped the trap. Jerome's army was simply too slow. Despite their utter exhaustion and hunger, Davout's troops race to cut off the Russians at Magyov. There's still time to catch them, but Davout has already lost a third of his men to sickness, exhaustion, and desertion. Captain Gardier recalls the conditions. Beaten by the wind and rain, after being weakened by the excessive heat, the horses as well as the men can barely stand.
But you're not sure.
Napoleon's first attempt to force a decisive battle at Minsk has failed because of logistical problems, Jerome's indecisiveness, and perhaps the Emperor's own lack of energy. While Davout and Jerome chase Bagration, the Emperor now turns his attention to Barclay de Tolly. Here, Marshal Murat's cavalry corps are to keep the Russians busy at Drissa, while the main French-led force is supposed to continue east, then turn north to cut off the Russian communications with St. Petersburg. If Barclay retreats, the two Russian armies will be even farther apart. If he stands and fights, he'll be surrounded and outnumbered. But the Russian